You know, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. How can a collection of words written 400 years ago still have such a massive impact on our world today? We're going to dive into that very question by looking at one of the most influential books ever printed in English. So picture this, it's the early 1600s. And this isn't some late-night philosophical debate. This is a real-world crisis. And for the king on the throne, the answer wasn't a bigger army, it wasn't tougher laws. No, he believed the one thing that could unify his shattered kingdom was a book. But before we can really get the solution, we have to understand just how bad the problem was. And in England, at the turn of the 17th century, the problem was a deep, bitter, and honestly, a bloody division over politics, over power, and over faith. Okay, you really have to see this timeline to believe it, because it is just wild. In the span of just a few decades, England's entire religious identity was thrown into total chaos. First, you've got King Henry VIII, who breaks away from Rome. Then, his daughter Mary I comes in and violently drags the whole country back to Catholicism. And then, her sister, Elizabeth I, takes the throne and yanks it right back to Protestantism. But she tries to create this kind of tense middle ground. And the result? Well, pretty much nobody was happy. This constant religious whiplash left the entire kingdom unstable and just deeply, deeply polarized. So this is the situation that King James I inherits. It's not some foreign army at the gates. The war was inside the country's own borders. You had these two powerful groups within the Church of England, the bishops and the Puritans, and they were locked in this brutal struggle for the very soul of the nation. It was so divided that each side had its own preferred English translation of the Bible, which just reinforced their differences day after day. So King James is looking at all this, seeing his kingdom literally tearing itself apart, and he knew that more soldiers or clever political tricks, that just wasn't going to cut it. He needed something bigger, something radical, something that could actually bring people together. He needed a grand plan. The king's idea was actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. What if? What if everyone was reading from the exact same script? Literally. So he does something incredible. He calls a meeting of the rival factions. He brings the bishops and the Puritans to the very same table and gives them this monumental task. You are going to work together to create a single, definitive translation of the Bible, one that both sides can agree on and that all of England can finally unite behind. What happened next wasn't just, a translation project. It was one of the most rigorous and ambitious scholarly missions in human history. This was a 7-year trial by manuscript, a massive quest to forge the Word of God into the most perfect English possible. To really get a sense of the scale here, just look at these numbers. This wasn't a couple of guys in a dusty room. This was, it was like an intellectual Manhattan Project for its time. King James put together a literal army of scholars, 47 of the most brilliant language experts in the entire kingdom. They worked for 7 straight years, organized into 6 separate teams or companies working across different cities, all focused on this one incredible goal. Now, of all the numbers on this project, this one might be the most mind-blowing. 14. To make absolutely sure the translation was accurate, and to prevent any single person's bias from creeping into the text, every single verse of the Bible was meticulously reviewed a minimum of 14 times before it could be approved. 14! So how in the world did they pull that off? Well, they had this absolutely genius system of checks and balances. Here's how it worked. An individual scholar would do their translation, but that was just step 1. From there, it had to be reviewed by their entire team. Once the team agreed, they sent it to the other 5 teams for them to review it. And only after it passed through all of those filters did it finally land in front of a grand committee of the best translators from each team for one last final review. It was an unbreakable process, all designed for maximum accuracy and agreement. Now, this whole meticulous process served one single core mission. And this is probably the most important thing to understand about the King James Bible. Their job was not to be interpreters. They weren't trying to tell you what they thought the text meant. Their goal was something called verbal equivalence, a literal, word-for-word translation. They wanted to take the exact Hebrew and Greek words in their exact grammatical structure and find the closest possible English match. They completely rejected the alternative, dynamic equivalence, which is where a translator basically gives you their interpretation of the idea behind the words. They saw themselves as faithful messengers, not commentators. And because of this incredibly strict process and philosophy, the book they created had some very, very unique features.
Features that, honestly, are often misunderstood today, but were completely intentional.
So these translators weren't just set loose in a library. King James gave them a very strict set of rules. The overall style had to follow the existing bishop's Bible so it would feel familiar to people. They had to consult a specific list of earlier English translations, and this one is critical. They were forbidden from adding their own interpretive notes in the margins. That was a huge source of arguments with previous Bibles. This project was about the text, the whole text, and nothing but the text. Have you ever been reading the King James Bible and seen words in italics and wondered why? Well, it's not for emphasis, which is what most of us would think. It's actually one of the book's most brilliant and transparent features. Those italicized words are words that the translators had to add to make the sentence flow grammatically in English, words that weren't literally in the original Hebrew or Greek manuscripts. It's their way of being totally honest with you, the reader, showing you exactly where they had to build a small bridge from the ancient language to our own. All right, and what about all the these and thous and ye's? I know, they can sound a little old-fashioned to us, but they serve a vital grammatical purpose that modern English has completely lost. It's actually pretty simple. In the King James Version, if you see thou or thee, the text is speaking to one single person. If you see ye or you, it's talking to a group of people. This distinction, which comes directly from the original languages, adds this whole other layer of precision that's just gone from most modern translations. You know, sometimes the language in the KJV can feel a little peculiar, right? The sentences can seem a bit structured in an unusual way. Well, that's not bad English. That's a deliberate choice. It's something called a Hebrewism. The translators were so dedicated to being faithful to the original that they would often mimic the exact sentence structure of the Hebrew, even if it sounded a little strange in English. They wanted to give the English reader a real taste of the rhythm and the style of the ancient text itself.
And this dedication to the original structure wasn't just for Hebrew. When they got to the New Testament, they did the same thing with the Greek. See, the original Greek often uses these incredibly long, complex sentences, packing an entire theological argument into one single statement. Now, a lot of modern translations will break those up into shorter, easier to digest sentences, but the KJV translators kept them intact. By doing that, they preserve the author's complete, unbroken train of thought, and you can see exactly how each idea connects to the next.
So King James got his book. It was an absolute masterpiece of scholarship, and it did help unify the kingdom. But that still doesn't fully answer our original question. Why has this specific translation lasted with such incredible power for more than 4 centuries? A really crucial piece of this puzzle comes down to the documents themselves. Think of ancient manuscripts like different branches of a family tree. The KJV's New Testament was translated from a family of manuscripts called the Textus Receptus, or the received text. This was the standard Greek text that was widely available to scholars back in the 1600s. In the century since then, older manuscripts from a different family, known as the Alexandrian text, have been discovered, and most popular modern Bibles today are translated from this Alexandrian family. It's not about one being right and one being wrong, but about understanding that they come from 2 different ancient streams of the manuscript tradition. And this distinction leads us to the reasons that are often given for the KJV's incredible staying power. Its supporters will argue that its manuscript base, the Textus Receptus, is doctrinally stronger. Because it was translated back in 1611, it's completely free from any of the modern theological or political debates that might influence newer translations. It's also unaffected by modern copyright laws, which often require new editions to make a certain number of changes to get a new copyright. Its creators were not just experts in Greek and Hebrew, they were masters of the English language. And finally, you have to consider this. It has been tried, tested, and proofread by millions of readers for over 400 years. In the end, the story of the King James Bible is really this amazing story about a bold plan to heal a divided nation. It shows what can happen when you combine meticulous scholarship with a profound sense of purpose. And it really leaves us with this one final, fascinating question to think about. In a world that is always changing, always updating, what is it that gives a simple collection of words the power to truly stand the test of time?